This is Andy Carter. I'm the Member of Parliament for Warrington South, and welcome to another live Q&A session. It's 20 minutes or so of questions from you, and you're welcome to post them now. You can post them simply by going onto the link below this screen and ask questions of me and of the government, and I'll do my best to answer them for you over the next 20 minutes. And I promise that if I can't answer a question directly here, if you email me afterwards, I'll do my best to get back to you, and I can certainly ask questions of ministers as well. On top of that, you can email me, andy.carter.mp@parliament.uk. So if you email me during this broadcast, again, we'll do our best to get hold of that information for you, and we'll come back to you and give you an answer as best we possibly can. Midway through the second lockdown period, and a couple of weeks still to go, and I know it's tough. It's tough for me. I'm spending a lot of time at home with my family and two dogs, locked in an environment where it's perhaps not what we're used to doing. And I think for everybody at the moment, we're starting to feel the strain a little bit. It's really, really important, though, that we maintain that social distancing and we maintain our reason for doing this, which is to try and beat this dreadful virus. So please do stay home, keep yourself safe, and we can protect the NHS and save lives by doing that. So that's the whole purpose for doing this. Over the last couple of days or so, I had quite a lot of emails, so I'm going to crack straight on today and try and cover as many of the questions that you've raised as possible. Before I do that, though, just to mention a quick couple of phone numbers. If you want to get hold of the council at any time, who are responsible for coordinating activity here in Warrington, their main phone number is Warrington 443322. That's 443322. Another number that I've been asked to give out, and I think this is a really important number, particularly for elderly residents in the constituency who might not be getting the same contact and interaction that they're used to because family and friends have to stay away, is a number for Silverline. And Silverline is specifically there for people aged over the age of 70, so 70, 80 and 90, and that's their telephone number. It's 0800 470 80 90, and that's a service that's free of charge that anybody in that generation can call, even if they just want to have a chat. There's every reason that you can do that. So 0800 470 80 90. Final number I want to give out at the start of this is the Citizens Advice Bureau in Warrington, which unfortunately has to close its doors at the moment because of social distancing, but they are still available on the phone. And that phone number is 0300 330 90 91. That's 0300 330 90 91. Now, over the last couple of weeks or so, we've been delivering a leaflet to homes across the constituency. This is the one. It's got lots and lots of information on there, including those phone numbers. You should find that dropping through your door if it hasn't already, and I hope you'll find that useful on guidance and advice to keep yourself safe and advice to help you through the lockdown period. I want to start just for a moment as well, reflecting on the news in Warrington over the last couple of weeks of the number of cases that have occurred here in the area, and how our hospital has reacted to that. And I've mentioned in my comment piece this week in the Warrington Guardian the tremendous work that the doctors and the nurses have been doing at the Guardian, in particular their innovation around a CPAP device, a little black box that you would normally use for patients that are suffering from sleep apnea. They managed to make some adjustments to this, and it's working tremendously well in helping to keep people off the really, really invasive process of a ventilator. And we've seen a huge benefit from the work that those doctors and nurses have done at Warrington Hospital. So thank you so much to them. And we are incredibly lucky here in Warrington to have that level of innovation taking place, and really do appreciate the work that they're doing. This is a really nasty virus, and it grabs hold of people and really shakes, and actually we need every single bit of effort to try and do our best to fight it off, and those doctors and nurses are doing incredibly well. Okay, let's move to questions. First one that came in yesterday on email. It's from Vicky Williams, who's in Latchford. She emailed and she wants to know about PPE reaching the front line. What are you doing to make sure that PPE is in our hospital and care homes? And Paul Morris asks as well if I watched the Panorama programme on Monday. Paul, the honest answer is no, I didn't watch that programme on Monday. As far as responding to journalist comments in that programme, I've come to the conclusion that actually a lot of conjecture that appears in these programs is simply that, conjecture and speculation. And I'd much rather talk to people that are working on the front line and responsible for delivering that PPE here in Warrington. And I do every couple of days. And this week I've spoken to Colin Scales, who's the Chief Executive of the Bridgewater NHS Trust, and they're responsible for community services in Warrington. I've also spoken to Professor Simon Constable, who's the Chief Exec of Warrington Hospital, and to Dr. Andrew Davis, who's responsible for GPs, the commissioning group that looks after all the GPs in Warrington. And my simple question to them has been, every time I speak to them, do you have enough PPE? And I'm very pleased to say that the answer is, yeah, absolutely. We are getting the PPE that we need. It's coming through to us. I think at the same time, though, there's a recognition that this is a global pandemic and they've got to work in a smart way and operate as a network of providers. And so that's what's been happening here in Warrington. I think that's one of the reasons that we haven't seen the sort of challenges that have been talked about elsewhere, that our hospitals and our health providers have had a good access to PPE and have been able to keep their services alive because of that. In terms of care homes, now, care homes, obviously, that are run privately are responsible for sourcing their own PPE. But the systems that we put in place recently with the Local Resilience Forum means that there's a backup and a way of ensuring that those providers have PPE available to them. And that Local Resilience Forum is coordinated by the local councils, and Warrington Borough Council have done a tremendous job in continuing to source PPE to make sure that our care homes in Warrington have PPE. And I can tell you that where I've been contacted by people within an hour, if they've had problems with PPE supplies, within an hour we've been able to supply them and made sure that the staff that are working in those homes are safe. If you do have problems, if you work in a care home and you know there are problems, then please get in touch and we will do our best. But we do need specific details of where those problems are, and we'll do our best to make sure that those problems are rectified straight away. Okay, let's move on to another question. This is from Amanda, who's in Busey, and she says, when is the lockdown likely to end? And I think that is probably the question that everybody at the moment is wanting to know. And the honest answer is it's not going to be before this time next week. The earliest that it's likely to be reviewed is the 7th of May. And I think it's fair to say that the lockdown's really not going to come to an abrupt end. There are certainly indications that the measures that government have put into place, the social distancing and the closure of schools and shops and asking people to stay at home, is working. We're seeing the number of infections fall. But the real concern at the moment is around the risk of a second peak. So we need to make sure that we do everything we can and have a plan in place to make sure that that resurgence doesn't happen later in the year. So the government have put a 5-plan process in place to make sure that when they do decide to lift the restrictions, that we have the systems in place to try and focus on that. So making sure that the NHS can cope, and that's why they've opened more hospitals, things like the Nightingale Hospital in Manchester, making sure that we've got a sustained and consistent fall in the death rate from coronavirus, and that we're confident that the infection rate is falling as well. Reliable information from the government committee responsible for ensuring that the levels of infection are decreasing. We need to also make sure that we've got all that PPE in the right places so that when we do lift the lockdown, if there are problems and resurgence, we can deal with that quickly. And then the final thing is we need to make sure that the NHS isn't going to be overwhelmed later in the year. So making sure that everything is refreshed and ready to keep our NHS fighting fit. They're the 5 things that really do matter to make sure that we have a plan ready to move forward when we lift the lockdown. But I do think it's not going to be a situation where all the restrictions are lifted in one go. We're probably going to see restrictions in place for a period of time, but some of the things that will change will allow some people to go out, and we might see some reduction in perhaps, for example, going to work and going to school. But those things will be explained and announced as we move forward. Let's move on to another question. This is from Terry in Chapelford. He wants to know who is able to get a test for coronavirus. Well, the first thing to say is that there are a number of testing regimes that are talked about, and probably the one that's talked about most is the one to check to see if you actually have coronavirus, if you're suffering symptoms. And this is where, for a lot of people, if you're not suffering symptoms, it's very, very difficult to get a test and to know whether you are actually somebody who's suffering. So if you have symptoms and you are an essential worker, working in the NHS, working in a care home, you can have a test, and you need to go to gov.uk/coronavirus, and you can book your test on there. And there are a number of testing locations in this area, and you will be able to be directed to one of those testing locations. Anybody that's over 65 who has symptoms can also have a test. And if you live with somebody who's over 65 in your household and you have symptoms, you can have a test. If you have work to do that cannot be done at home, you can have a test as well. And the full list of people that are entitled to a test, and it's a significant number of people now, is available on the government's website and also on my website as well, which is andycarter.org.uk, andycarter.org.uk. But NHS workers and patients without symptoms, where there is a clinical need, can also get a test by going to that location as well. And also social care workers can get tests as well. But the number of key workers really open now for people to get tests and to get checked. That's the test that if you have symptoms, they do a swab in your mouth and a swab up your nose, and they'll send it away. And within about 48 hours, you get the results back. The other test is a test to look at if you've had coronavirus. And that's something that's still being worked on at the moment. There's a tremendous amount of research going into checking whether that is a reliable test. And there are plans in the future to roll that out to more people. But at the moment, that's not really the test that people are focusing on. The focus test at the moment, the one that the discussions are about in the media, is the one that takes place at a testing centre and takes swabs to see if you have the actual virus, perhaps because you're suffering symptoms. Okay, move on to another question from Mark, who's in Penketh. He's asking about small business loans. When can I apply? I'm a small business. I need a loan to help with cash flow. When can I apply? Well, first thing to say is there are a couple of different processes for loans. The CBILS loans is one that's been talked about for quite a while now. That's been administered by the banks, and that's for loans of up to £40 million. And that's guaranteed up to 80% by the government and being distributed through the banks. The second loans is called the bounce back loan, and they're really for small businesses that were announced earlier in the week by the Chancellor, and they will be coming on stream from Monday onwards. Now, they're for small and medium-sized businesses, and you can borrow with those between £2,000 and £50,000. And that's a government-backed 100% scheme. So 100% of that loan is backed by the government. All you need to do on this one is apply online from Monday. Full details will be online on the gov.uk website, and we'll also put links onto my website as well. Just in terms of brief eligibility, you need to be based in the UK as a business. You need to have been negatively affected by coronavirus, and you need to make sure that your business is not classed as a business that was in difficulty on the 31st of December. So this time last in the Christmas period, if you were already struggling with problems at that point, you might find that you're not necessarily eligible for a loan. This is really for people that are suffering because of coronavirus. If you are a state-funded primary school, if you are a bank or an insurance broker, you can't apply for these loans. They're really for small business affected by coronavirus, and details of those are all announced on Monday and will go live on Monday. 100% of the loan is free, and there won't be any fees or interest to pay for the first 12 months on those loans. And I really do think they will make a big difference in supporting some of our smaller businesses here in Warrington. The other website that's quite useful if you are running a business and want some advice on things that are available to you, because there are, to be honest, there are so many things at the moment that the government have put in place that it's sometimes a bit difficult to try and work out what you're entitled to. Businesssupport.gov.uk is a really, really good website. It's run by the business department of Bays, and there's lots and lots of advice on there and all the other things that you might be eligible to if you're running a business, and tips and hints on how you can deal with certain things. So businesssupport.gov.uk is a really, really good website to go to as well. All of these links, by the way, we'll put onto Facebook, and we'll also put them onto my website. Right, another question from Jennifer in Stockton Heath. She wants to know how close we are to getting a vaccine. I think the honest answer is that to that question at the moment is I can't give you a definitive answer. I think we are some way on from where we were, and scientists in Oxford have started working this week on designing a vaccine that probably will be available towards the end of this year. But there are no shortcuts to testing vaccines. They've got to be tested on humans, got to go through the trials, be regulatory approved. So it's probably going to be somewhere around 5-6 months until we start to see the benefits of those things going forward. But I do think there are advances in drugs moving forward, huge amount of drugs being tested as well for treating coronavirus, and lots of clinical testing going on as well. And I was talking earlier in the week to one of the chief execs of the health providers here, who was advising me about a testing that had been going on with health service workers for assessing who is showing symptoms and who isn't. And that sort of information really will give scientists a lot of information about the type of formation of this virus and how it's moving through society. So answer at the moment is I can't give you a fixed answer on when a virus will be available, but the government investing a huge amount of money to try and make a vaccine available as soon as possible. Colin on Facebook, can I give a shout out to local shops who are providing a brilliant service at the moment? I absolutely agree, actually. Our local service providers, independent shops, have done a brilliant job in providing services to communities. We are incredibly lucky here in Warrington to have a mix of large supermarkets who, again, have been providing wonderful service. The people that are working in those stores, real dedicated effort to make sure that people get the things that they need when they go there. But also those small independent stores as well, banks, bakeries, butchers, post offices, they're really doing a fantastic job. And I thank the people that are working in those stores. To the milk delivery services, to the farm shops, thank you to the people working in them as well. And also the market stalls, markets that have popped up in locations across Warrington South, people selling things in different ways, a lot of wholesalers moving into selling direct to the public as well. Those businesses have adapted and now delivering and doing their best to provide a service to local communities. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Retail and the retail supply chain are really, really crucial area. A question that's come in from Samantha. She's wanting to know what the government is doing to support people who are at risk of domestic abuse. This is one of the sad things that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 weeks. When I speak to the police in Warrington, they tell me about the really, really terrible news that the number of people involved in domestic incidents has grown significantly, and this is a terrible, terrible thing. If you can't feel safe in your own home, where can you feel safe? And for people that are worried about domestic violence, if you have any concerns at all, a national domestic abuse helpline is available. 0800 2000 247, 0800 2000 247. It's available 24 hours a day. If you are concerned about domestic abuse, that's a number to call. And of course, if you are worried at any time for your personal safety, 999. That's the number to call. The police will be there as soon as they can possibly be, and they will do everything they can to protect anyone concerned about domestic abuse. Right, let's move on to another question. It's another business question, actually. Janice runs a company in the town centre. She's made a claim for the business grant, but it's been rejected because her business is ineligible. How can she meet the criteria that the government have set down? Janice, thank you very much for that question. I think the business grants that are available are predominantly available for two categories. For those people that get small business relief on their business rates, so usually single locations that are relatively small, you'll get single business rate relief and you will be entitled to a £10,000 grant. The second group of businesses that are entitled to a grant is the businesses in hospitality, in leisure and in retail. And that's predominantly shops, bars, restaurants, pubs. There's a group that have been identified by the government that are available for a grant of up to 25,000, and that depends on the size of your premises. Both of those grants are claimed through Warrington Borough Council. The money has been given to the council by the government and allocation is being made. And I have to say, well done to Warrington Council. When I last looked yesterday, it was about 70% of the businesses that were eligible in Warrington had received their grants. So, you know, thank you to the people that are working in that department to get the money out to businesses. If you found that you haven't been eligible for a grant and you're concerned or confused or not sure why that is, firstly, make contact with the council because they may well be able to help you and give you some guidance. And it might be that you've just not registered your business for paying business rates. And if you do that, you might be eligible then to get one of these grants. If that doesn't succeed and you need my help, then of course email me, andy.carter.mp@parliament.uk. Now, I just want to preface all of that by saying that not every business is entitled to a business grant. There are a certain group of businesses, particularly those that share business units. So if you're in a shared office space that aren't currently included in that scheme, and I have written to the Chancellor to say I think it should be extended to those types of businesses. But as of yet, no news back from Rishi, but we'll continue to push him and we'll continue to write on areas where we think we need slight changes and modifications to try and help more businesses here in Warrington. A message from Paul in Appleton and Simon Ainscoe. When will schools reopen? It's a really good question, that. Of course, schools are still open for critical care workers' children and for vulnerable children. And I really want to pay massive tribute to the teachers who are working in our schools at the moment for their efforts. I was speaking to a chair of governors a little bit earlier today about his group of schools. And he said to me there were about 90 children still at school in those schools. And they'd made a hub arrangement so that not every school was open, but there was always a place available for a child if they needed to go to school. To get the schools reopened fully, we need to do quite a bit of work, I think, at this moment in time and be absolutely certain that the virus isn't going to resurge again. So going forward, we may well see a situation where some schools are taking certain groups of children in the morning, certain groups in the afternoon to allow for more space for social distancing. Do I have a fixed date where that is? The honest answer is no, I don't. But I know that government are discussing it. The Department for Education have been meeting and frequently talking about it. And I get regular feedback from ministers on the work that's going on there. But as yet, I can't give you a fixed date when schools are going to open. But I can tell you that it will be scientific, a decision that's led by scientists, so that we make sure that we avoid any risk of that second wave of viruses coming around again. But, you know, watch this space. I think we will start to hear some information around how schools are going to reopen in the not too distant future. Popular question that's coming, one or two people sent this, Alex, and both saying rubbish is piling up in their back garden, having spent the last few weeks doing everything they can to get the garden looking a little bit better. When are the tips going to reopen? When will our recycling centres be open again? It's a really good question, that. I want to pay tribute to the fantastic work of the local bin men who've been round and have continued to provide a service every single week, with black bins, green bins, blue bins being emptied on a regular basis here in Warrington. So thank you very much for the team that have been doing that. In terms of reopening the 3 recycling centres in Warrington, that's a decision for Warrington Borough Council, and it's something that I've raised and I've written today to the Chief Executive of the Council to say that I do think now we need to start to formulate a plan to reopen our tips here in Warrington. The reason they were closed is because there was concern around social distancing, and at the time it was felt that trips to the tip weren't necessarily an essential journey. I think it's now fair to say that getting rid of rubbish and making sure that we don't encourage vermin in our gardens and that we try and make sure we have a healthy environment is important. And the Secretary of State has asked councils to look at this. So I've contacted Warrington Council to say, please, can you give us a plan to tell us when our tips will be open here? And I'm very mindful that tips in councils, for example, in Trafford or in Wigan or in other Merseyside areas, are reopening. So I do think it's important now that we make those moves forward and Warrington gets its tips open as soon as possible. We also need to make sure that they're safe, that the police are involved to make sure that queuing safely in cars on roads. But the longer that we leave it, we're probably going to see an even bigger surge for using tips. So the council do need to put something in place, but I do hope it won't be too long before we have our recycling centres reopened here in Warrington. And I'll continue to push the local authority to make that happen as soon as possible. A question with regards to planning from Richard. Can you give us an update on what's going on with the Stobart application, and another question on local plans as well? Well, the Stobart application is still with the Secretary of State for local government. At the moment, they've paused any planning decisions at government level because all of the efforts of central government are focused on COVID-19, and particularly that department who are coordinating with local councils around the country. Every bit of effort is focused on that. So I've raised it with the Secretary of State, and at this moment there is no anticipated timescale, but it is a decision that is still pending, and as soon as we get an update on it, I'll make sure we post full details on my website and here on Facebook as well. In terms of the planning process for the local plan, there was guidance given to local councils that planning should continue. We need to make sure that as the country recovers from this virus, we're in a position to move the country forward, and planning is really important. So local planning meetings are still taking place. And I know the local council are continuing to work on revising the local plan. I'll be calling on them to publish a revised version because since the comments were made in their most recent consultation, quite a few things have changed. And I think given the economic circumstances which have changed, and also the availability of land in Warrington, particularly with things like Fiddler's Ferry be closing down and becoming available, we should see a revision in the local plan. But of course, that's down to the local council. We'll continue to put pressure on them to publish that so that people can comment on it as soon as possible, because we do need a local plan to make sure that that development happens in the right place and in the right way at the right time. I'm conscious that there are many more questions coming in, and I'm going to offer my apologies now to those people I've not gotten to answer your question. We will do our best to answer it. If you send me an email, andy.carter.mp@parliament.uk. If I don't have the information, I'll do my best to get it for you from ministers, and we'll respond to every email that we get. I want to draw to a close. it would be remiss of me not to mention Captain Tom, who's celebrating his 100th birthday today. And it was a real pleasure to be able to write to Captain Tom, or now Colonel Tom, who's been promoted by the Queen today, to Colonel Tom, to offer my congratulations on behalf of everybody here in the Warrington South constituency. I think he's a true hero and a real light, a ray of light in dark times. So £30 million raised by Colonel Tom. Thank you for everything you've done, Tom. And I wish you all the best from everybody here in Warrington South on your 100th birthday. I just want to conclude by saying, please remember the importance of social distancing. It is one of the biggest weapons that we have in beating this virus. Stay 2 meters away from people if they're not in your household. That way we significantly reduce the risk of transmission of the virus. And remember, if you go out, wash your hands when you come back for 20 seconds, because again, that's an important way of killing this virus that's transferred by people touching and by people walking. Stay home, do your best to protect the NHS, and that will save lives. Thank you very much for tuning in. Do stay safe, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.